Growing numbers of Israel's military reservists, including members of its most important Air Force squadron, have been refusing to report for duty. For more on that, let's cross to Tel Aviv. Jonathan Conricus is former spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24. A strike, if you will, by reservists. Can you just put that into context? How unprecedented is it for Israel?
Well, good evening. Thank you for having me. I hope the connection is well enough for us to be able to communicate. It is rather unprecedented that there are strikes and threats not to serve by reservists in an issue not related to combat activity. The IDF is the People's Army of the State of Israel, has defended Israel from 48 and until today, and has seen its fair share of combat. And in each round of combat, there have been fringes that have not wanted to serve for various reasons. This, in my mind, is the first time that Israeli patriots, members of reserve forces, are indicating to the government that they are not going to be willing to serve in the future. It's not that they haven't reported for duty, and they also said, by the way, that if there will be combat and a real threat, then we will report to duty nevertheless. But this is definitely a new step and something that I think Israel hasn't seen before.
What's your personal reaction? We've had, for instance, a spokesperson for those who are leading this movement among the reservists, a man who goes by the name of Colonel G. He has been told to curb his enthusiasm, even told by his superiors that he would not be able to serve if he continues, if I understand correctly.
Well, what I think is that the unique combat capability of the IDF lies in the fact that it is the unifying factor of the State of Israel. You could call it the last sacred cow in Israeli society. It is the institution in Israel that enjoys the highest level of public trust, and as such, it needs to be protected and maintained that way. In my mind, I totally respect anybody and their own personal views and their fears for the future of Israeli democracy, which I personally share. But I also personally think that politics, having that in the IDF, is a very slippery slope. And we've already started to see counter petitions or counter statements of other reserve units or reserve commanders who are saying, we're in no matter what, and don't listen to the other people from our unit. And that's a dangerous thing, because we don't want a separated force, and we don't want politics in the IDF. And as important and as burning as the issues are, I believe, and so do many senior Israeli military officials, just now 36 generals signed a joint letter, generals that have left politics and right politics, come from all parts of Israeli society, from the Air Force, ground forces, etc. They just signed an hour ago a joint statement saying, let's leave politics out of the IDF.
Leave politics out of the IDF. When you talk about the Israeli Defense Forces being this gel, this unifying institution for the nation, is it also the unifying institution for Israel's democracy?
I think that it's a very strong institution. It is the most revered by the Israeli society. And I think it is not by coincidence that so many people in Israel and around the world stood up and took notice once this letter of Air Force reserve officers was assigned, and 37 out of 40 reserve pilots indicated that they were not going to come to training yesterday. That is the reason, because the IDF is such an important institution, and the IDF is definitely what brings society together. And I suppose you're insinuating into what the future may lead and what will happen if the legislation is passed and this judicial reform or overhaul, or however one may call it, actually happens as it is planned now, what will the IDF do? That is a big question that I think Israeli commanders and the head of the ISA, the police, and perhaps even Mossad are contemplating, and I think that's being spoken about in high circles in Israel. My hope, as an Israeli patriot and somebody who cares greatly for this miracle that the State of Israel is, I hope that leadership will evolve here and calm the situation down and bring people together to discuss, reach some kind of compromise, and get people off the street and do it in a peaceful and unifying manner, because otherwise the results could be very, very threatening for our very national security.
It's a tough one because in a democracy, soldiers answer to a civilian government. But what do you do, for instance, when you have, say, the current finance minister who talked about the town of Huwara being erased, effectively calling for ethnic cleansing of Palestinians?
Yeah, while I totally reject that statement by Bezalel Smotrich, I think it was extremely poor wording and definitely not something that an Israeli minister should be thinking or saying, whether he is very angry or frustrated by another terror attack by Palestinians or not. And he has since walked that back, and I think not a moment too soon. And when he walked that statement back, he also said that what caused him to walk it back was that pilots, a friend of his, approached him and said, listen, we pilots in the IDF and people who execute government policy hold deadly or lethal force in our hands. And when we hear those kinds of statements, that causes us to be very worried. So I think this is a very strong indication of the health of the Israeli democracy and how sensitive and high-tuned the reserve officers and the IDF is. And there was also a statement by the chief of the military, the chief of the general staff, Lieutenant General Halevi, who reassured all of the IDF, telling them that I will make sure that the orders given to Israeli soldiers to execute are going to be lawful and according to our moral code and as we have operated over all these years.
Still though, you have Israel's allies and friends that are not reassured. You heard that clip at the outset of the U.S. Defense Secretary. Did Lloyd Austin choose the right words there?
I didn't hear the Secretary's own words. I heard your reporting of it, and I assume it's correct. And if that was the case, I think that's a fair reminder. And I think everybody in Israel are these days very concerned about the state of our democracy, those that claim that unlawful things were done in the past, and those who are very afraid of what this proposed legislation may lead us to. But what really needs to happen, in my point of view now, is for the elected government and for the opposition to calm the tension and to take a step back and to get people around the negotiating table and to step things down. Because we've seen over the last days a very rapid pace of unraveling, and it seems as if both sides, legislators from the government as well as those who are leading the pro-democracy protests, are not willing to step down. And that's a dangerous situation, one that we probably don't have anything to win if it continues to spiral. So my hope is that leadership will prevail here and that the greater good of the State of Israel will be at the paramount interest of everybody involved, first and foremost the government in power, but also those on the opposition that are leading the demonstrations against it.
Jonathan Conricus, thank you so much for speaking with us from Tel Aviv.
Thank you.